I knew my wife walked in her sleep every night. But today when I showed her a sharp knife in her hand and she pointed it at me, I realized she wasn't actually sleeping. Then I set the knife down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen like I hadn't just looked into the eyes of someone I didn't recognize at all. We had a routine. Every night, around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd feel the mattress shift. Claire would sit up, eyes open, breathing slow, and just walk to the bathroom, to the kitchen, sometimes just standing in the hallway, staring at the wall like she was waiting for a bus. The first time it happened, I panicked, grabbed her arm, tried to wake her up. She let out this low moan, stumbled, and then looked at me with these completely blank eyes and said, "The water's boiling," before walking back to bed and collapsing like nothing happened. I Googled it the next morning. Somnambulism. Sleepwalking. More common than people think. Don't startle them. Don't force them awake. Just guide them gently back to bed. So that's what I did. Every night. For 3 years. I became the unofficial night guardian of our apartment. I'd hear her footsteps, slip out of bed, follow 2 steps behind, make sure she didn't trip over the coffee table or try to go down the stairs. It became such a normal part of my life that I started setting a light alarm at 2:30 just in case. I told myself it was love. I told myself she couldn't help it. And in the daylight, Claire was everything. She laughed loud and cooked badly and remembered every single birthday of every single person she'd ever met. She had this way of touching my face when she thought I looked tired. Just 2 fingers on my cheek, like checking if I was real. We weren't perfect. We argued about money, about whose turn it was to call the landlord, about the fact that she thought my best friend Derek talked too much and I thought her sister called too often. Normal stuff. Background noise stuff. I loved her. God, I loved her. But there were things. Small things. Things I filed away under quirks. Because love makes you generous with your filing system. She lied about small things. Not big things, just unnecessary ones. She'd say she picked up the dry cleaning when she hadn't. Say she'd talked to my mom when she'd only texted. Say she'd been at yoga when her gym bag was clearly dry. Little lies, the kind that had no reason to exist, which made them somehow worse than regular lies. She had a key to her ex's apartment. She said it was just practical, because he had her grandmother's recipe box and she kept meaning to get it. That key lived on her keychain for 11 months. I counted, and she had this phrase she used whenever I brought something up that bothered me. Whenever I tried to start a real conversation about money, about the ex, about anything, she'd look at me with this very particular expression, somewhere between bored and disappointed, and say, "You're so sensitive sometimes, Daniel." Just like that. Soft, almost gentle, like she was commenting on the weather. First time she said it, I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was being sensitive. I apologized. Second time, I thought, okay, she's stressed, she didn't mean it. Third time, I started wondering if I was broken. By the 30th time, and yes, I eventually counted those too, it had become a reflex she didn't even notice anymore. Her shutdown button for any conversation she didn't want to have. I was so deep in that pattern that I'd started preemptively editing myself. Thinking, is this sensitive? Before I spoke. Shrinking myself into the shape of someone easier to love. Anyway, the knife. It was a Thursday, 3:17 a.m. I know because I checked my phone right before I got up. She was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, and when I flicked on the dim light above the stove, we'd agreed no overhead light during episodes. Too jarring. I saw her. She had the big chef's knife. The good one, the $90 Wusthof I'd saved up for because I actually like to cook. She was holding it at her side, and her eyes were open, and she was just standing there. I'd seen her pick things up before during episodes. A throw pillow, a book, a glass once. But never a knife. My stomach dropped. I stepped toward her, kept my voice soft the way I always did. Hey, come on, let's go back to bed. I gently reached for the knife. That's when she raised it. Not slashing. Not lunging, just raised it, pointed the tip directly at my chest, and looked at me, and her eyes were focused. Not the blank, glassy look of sleepwalking. Not the unfocused drift I knew so well. She was looking at me, at my face, with something that I can only describe as calculation. I froze. 3 full seconds of silence. Then she blinked, slowly lowered the knife, let it clatter onto the counter, and in the most convincing groggy voice I have ever heard in my life, she said, "WH, where am I?" Was I walking again? She let me guide her back to bed. She was asleep, or pretending to be asleep, within 2 minutes. I lay there in the dark next to her and stared at the ceiling and thought. Those weren't sleeping eyes. I didn't say anything to Claire the next morning. She made coffee, complained about her 9 a.m. meeting, kissed me on the cheek on her way out. Completely normal. And I stood in the kitchen staring at the knife I'd put back in the block and thought, maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm sensitive. That word again. Even in my own head, her voice. I called Derek. Derek is my best friend from college. Claire hated him. Or not hated, but she had this very specific condescension for him. Called him your frat boy, even though he was literally in an improv club, not a fraternity. She said he was a bad influence because once, for years ago, we'd stayed out until 1 a.m. watching a basketball game, and I'd come home slightly buzzed. One time, for years ago, Derek, for his part, had been quietly, carefully, loyally not saying things about Claire for the better part of 3 years. I told him about the knife, the whole thing, the eyes, the way she'd looked at me, the performance afterward. Silence on his end. Derek, yeah, okay, a long exhale. Okay, so there's some stuff. He'd been sitting on it. For months, he said. He'd run into Claire's friend Priya at a mutual thing, a birthday party for someone we both barely knew. And Priya had been 3 glasses of wine deep and said something she'd clearly been holding. That Claire had been telling people, their people, that I was unstable, that I'd been struggling and she was holding things together, that she was worried about my episodes. My episodes. I nearly choked. I actually had to put the phone down for a second. Because here's the thing, I don't have episodes. I've never had episodes. But if someone's been quietly planting that narrative for, say, a year or 2, if the knife story ever got out, if something ever happened and she needed an explanation that made me look like the unhinged one, suddenly the sleepwalking had a different shape. Derek kept going. Said he'd also seen her car outside a gym she didn't belong to, one that happened to be around the corner from her ex's place. Said he'd wanted to tell me, but he knew I'd ask him how he knew, and then he'd have to say he'd been keeping an eye on things because he'd had a bad feeling for months, and he didn't want me to think he was just stirring drama. You should have told me, I said. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I'm telling you now. And then he told me the last thing. Claire's sleepwalking. He'd asked his cousin who was a sleep medicine nurse about it once, just out of curiosity after I'd mentioned it. The cousin had said something that had stuck with him. True somnambulism produces specific behaviors. Repetitive, purposeless movements. People don't usually pick up sharp objects with any kind of directionality. They don't make sustained eye contact. And most importantly, they don't perform convincing post-episode confusion on command. It's possible, Derek said carefully, that she's not always actually asleep, man. I sat with that for a long moment. And then the memory reel started. Every episode. Every night I'd followed her through the apartment. Every time she'd murmured something and I'd taken it as meaningless somnambulant noise. The time she'd gone to the front door and tried to open it. The time she'd stood by my desk and somehow knocked over the pile of documents I was organizing for a freelance job. The time I'd woken up to her standing in the doorway of the bathroom, just watching me. I'd been so careful, so patient, so gentle. God, past me was such an idiot. I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the grout for a while. Didn't cry. Not yet. Just felt that particular kind of sick that happens when something you thought was bad turns out to be much worse. Then I went back to the kitchen, picked up the Westhoff, washed it, put it back in the block, and started making a plan. I did not confront her immediately. I know that's what you're expecting. But if I'd walked in swinging accusations, she had the perfect defense already built. She'd look confused. She'd be hurt. She'd say something about how worried she was about me, and I'd end up apologizing for bringing it up. I'd done it 30 times with smaller things. So I waited. I gathered. I set up a small camera, the baby monitor kind, $49 from Amazon, angled at the kitchen. I told Claire I'd gotten paranoid about a gas leak smell and wanted to monitor things. She didn't question it. 3 nights of nothing. She slept straight through, which maybe she would have anyway, because she was smart enough to feel something had shifted. I was good at pretending, too. Turns out, on the 4th night, I got up first. Before any movement from her side of the bed, I went to the kitchen, pulled the chef's knife out of the block, and set it on the counter in the light. Then I went back to bed and waited. 40 minutes later, she got up. I followed at a distance. She went to the kitchen. She stood there. And then, slowly, with a deliberateness I can still see when I close my eyes, she picked up the knife. And she held it. And she stood there. And she looked at the doorway, waiting for me to come in. I watched from the hallway, slightly back, out of direct line of sight. A full minute passed. She set the knife down, ran her hand over her face, looked around, walked back to bed. No groggy murmuring, no stumbling, just walking, like a person awake, checking the hallway one more time before she got under the covers. I stayed in the hallway for a long time after. Then I went to her sister. Her sister Megan was the person I least expected to be an ally. They were close, thick as thieves. But when I sat in Megan's kitchen 2 days later and showed her the footage on my phone, and the other footage I'd gathered, the timeline of Claire's story about the ex's key versus the actual dates on the receipts I'd found, the text from Priya about what Claire had been saying about my episodes, Megan went very, very quiet. She told me you had panic attacks, Megan said. I don't. She told me you'd thrown something during a fight once. I've never thrown anything in my life. She did this before, she said quietly. With someone else. Before you. I told myself it was different this time. That was the moment that broke me, honestly. Not the knife. Not the lies. Megan saying I told myself it was different this time, with the specific grief of someone who'd been hoping very hard and been wrong. I cried in her kitchen. Real crying, not the bathroom floor staring kind. Megan gave me a paper towel because she was out of tissues, and I thought, this is incredibly uncinematic, and life is like that. Megan helped me. I'm not going to put everything she did in a YouTube video because she doesn't want the attention and she's been through enough. But she helped me get my ducks in a row before the conversation that needed to happen. I chose a Saturday morning. Claire's favorite time. She liked to sleep in, make elaborate brunch, feel leisurely. I wanted her in the space where she felt the most comfortable and the most certain of me. I made coffee, set out the nice mugs, waited. She came out in her robe, soft and morning warm, and kissed the top of my head and said, "You're up early." Couldn't sleep, I said, which was true. She sat down with her coffee. I sat across from her. I want to talk about the sleepwalking, I said. And I saw it. Just for half a second, something flicker behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly, more like calibration. She was choosing an approach. Of course, she said, concerned face sliding into place. Are you worried? Because I've been reading that stress can. I put the knife out on purpose, I said. Silence. The other night. I put it there to see what you'd do. She tilted her head. I don't know what you mean. I was asleep, Daniel. You know how my episodes. I have it on camera. I put my phone on the table between us. Played the clip. Watched her watch herself. The deliberate walk, the knife pick up, the waiting, the clean return to bed without a single stumble. She watched the whole thing. Then she looked at me, and the mask she was wearing rippled. I saw it. This genuine crack in the performance. And for one moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she said it. You're so sensitive sometimes, Daniel. Automatic. A reflex. Even now. Even with a camera clip sitting between us. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not meanly. Just this short, involuntary exhale of a laugh because the absurdity of it was enormous. I have more, I said. And then I showed her the rest. The footage. The timeline. Priya's text. Megan's testimony. She went through phases the way people do when everything collapses. Denial, then a version of offense, then this bizarre attempt at reframing where the story briefly became that she was doing the sleepwalking because I was stressful to live with, and didn't I feel responsible for that? Which, honestly, I'll hand it to her for creativity. And then finally, when none of that landed, she just stopped. Sat there. Coffee gone cold. So what do you want, she said. Flatly. Different voice. The real one. I want you out of the apartment, I said. By the end of the month. I'll pay first and last at a new place. We can split the rest cleanly. She looked at me for a long moment. And then, desperately, with the specific energy of someone who's used a line their whole life and is horrified to find it finally truly isn't working. You're so sensitive sometimes, Daniel. Yeah, I said. You've mentioned. I picked up my coffee cup, walked to the living room, and turned on the TV. She left the table, left the apartment. The door didn't slam. She closed it carefully, quietly, which was somehow worse than a slam. I sat there in the morning light watching a cooking competition I couldn't name. And for the first time in 3 years, the apartment felt like mine. She called 16 times that afternoon. Not exaggerating. I counted. 16. Then 4 voicemails. Each one a different emotional register. Angry, then sad, then reasonable, then angry again. Cycling through like a broken playlist. I listened to the first 2 and then stopped. Not because they were painful, but because they were just exhausting. Like watching someone try every key on a ring on a lock they've already been told has been changed. Then came the Instagram story. Vague but unmistakably aimed. Something about people who weaponize your vulnerabilities against you and staying strong when you're being pushed out of your own story. Had a sad song underneath. 634 people watched it. I know because Megan sent me a screenshot and said she posted this while we were on the phone, and I had to act normal. I deserve an Oscar. Megan became one of my closest people after that. I never expected it. She's dry and sardonic and doesn't sugarcoat anything, which is exactly what you need when you're processing the fact that the person you built your life around was running a quiet, patient, sustained campaign to make you seem unstable while pretending to have a neurological condition. She came over with Thai food 3 days after Claire moved out, and we sat on my kitchen floor because I didn't have enough chairs. Claire had taken the dining set, which she was technically entitled to, but the timing was a statement, and Megan said she did the sleepwalking thing with her ex too. I never told you I'm sorry. And I said, why didn't you say something? And she said, she's my sister, and I kept hoping. And we just sat with that for a while. Derek came over the following weekend and helped me buy 2 chairs from Craigslist for $40. They don't match. One is clearly from a different decade. They're my favorite things I own right now. Claire's friends, the ones she'd filled with her version of me, mostly kept their distance. A couple of them unfollowed me. One of them, a woman I'd always liked named Becca, sent me a message 3 weeks later that just said, for what it's worth, I didn't believe the stuff she was saying about you. You always seemed fine to me. I said thanks. She said, also that Instagram post was insane. I said, yeah. She sent a thumbs up. Friendship restored, I guess. The ex came up one more time. Turns out there was no recipe box. I don't know if there ever was a recipe box. I didn't ask. Some answers are less satisfying than the question, and you just have to leave them alone. I still don't sleep great. Not because I'm afraid. Claire is in her own apartment across town, sending Megan carefully curated updates about how she's healing and setting boundaries, which is somehow the most villainous use of therapy language I've ever encountered. I'm not afraid. I'm just a light sleeper now. I wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes and listen to the apartment breathe. No footsteps. No shifting mattress. No one to follow. It's quieter than I expected. It's lonelier, too, if I'm being honest. 3 years of loving someone, even someone who wasn't who you thought, doesn't just drain out like water. Some mornings I reach for my phone to text her something. A dumb meme, a restaurant that opened nearby, the kind of nothing text that's actually everything. And then remember, that part doesn't make for a satisfying video ending. But it's real, so there it is. What I can tell you is that my apartment has 2 mismatched chairs and a Wusthof chef's knife I am definitely not getting rid of. And last Tuesday, I made pasta from scratch for the first time in years because I could finally have the kitchen to myself without someone hovering with quiet, pointed comments about the mess I was making. It was good. Genuinely good. I ate it standing at the counter at 7 p.m. with a kitchen full of flour dust and felt, for a few minutes, like someone who was going to be okay. Not fully healed. Not closing credits. Lesson learned. Full circle. Just okay. Standing in my own kitchen. Making something real. That's enough for now.